What if I told you that thousands of armored men once thundered into battle, not for land faith or treasure, but for a wooden bucket? Stay with me, because by the time we reach the battlefield of Zappolino and the tower where the trophy still hangs, you'll see how pride can turn into mass hysteria. And if this kind of dark, unbelievable history is your thing, hit subscribe now so you don't miss the twists to come. History loves its noble banners, liberty, salvation, destiny, yet tucked between those grand causes are episodes so petty they feel like pranks played by fate. Today, we open the door to the War of the Bucket, where two neighbors nursed grudges like family heirlooms and let a minor theft metastasize into a blood-soaked statement no one could ever take back. To understand the madness you have to feel the map under your feet, early 14th century northern Italy, a patchwork of city-states prowling behind walls, their alliances braided and broken by the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, with Bologna and Modena glaring across fields and trade roads like feuding households who had forgotten how the quarrel even began. One gray morning, Modenese raiders slipped into Bologna's heart and yanked from the public well, not a jewel, not a relic, not a scroll, but a bucket, a vessel darkened by years of rope burn and iron taste, ordinary as bread. And yet when it vanished, the city rang its bells as if someone had desecrated a cathedral altar with muddy boots. Bologna demanded the bucket back with the solemnity of a treaty, and Modena replied with the oldest insult in the book, "Come and take it." Two phrases that sound simple until you layer on centuries of slights and 1,000 dinners full of cousins' stories about what they did last harvest. And suddenly wood and iron hoops swell into the size of honor itself. Soon, courtyards filled with clanking harness scribes inked orders that smelled of vinegar, and lamp-black messengers galloped out beneath banners that snapped like whips, and the factions stirred. Guelphs gathering beneath Bologna's colors, Ghibellines tightening around Modena while merchants counted losses not yet suffered, and mothers folded shirts that might never be worn again. At Zappolino, the fields trembled under hooves, the air hummed with bowstrings and ranks rolled forward like iron tides. We will not linger on gore, only on the terrible arithmetic lines that meet and break trumpets, that vanish into storm noise commanders scanning smoke for signals that never arrive until one side begins to fold, and the ground records the winners in footprints and the losers in silence. When the dust thinned, Modena held. Bologna bled pride into mud and retreated staring backward as if their gaze could drag the day back into their hands, and the bucket. Yes, the bucket was displayed like a saint's jawbone hung high in a tower, where bells tolled over markets and funerals alike as if to say, remember what a taunt can cost. Imagine walking your child through a square, where laughter and bargaining float up to the bell tower, and having to explain why that wooden thing up there matters, why uncles who never came home are part of its shadow. It is absurd, and it is unbearable, and that mixture ridicule fused to grief is the true shape of the story. But the bucket is only the opening door in a corridor of human stubbornness. Keep your hand on the railing as we step toward another frontier where property lines blurred over cold potatoes, and a single shot into a hungry pig's hide nearly pulled two empires into open flame, because once you learn how easily pride ignites, you start to smell smoke everywhere. The so-called Pig War began not with cannons or kings, but with a stubborn boar who loved potatoes more than boundaries. Picture a small island in 1859, mist curling over its fields, claimed by Britain and America at once. And in the middle of this uneasy peace waddled Charles Griffin's hulking black pig, trampling rows that belonged to his American neighbor Lyman Cutler. Cutler had endured raid after raid, tubers gutted plants, broken the smell of earth and pig musk, turning his mornings sour. Each protest met with a shrug from Griffin, who might as well have said, "Your crops are less real than my animal's appetite," until one June dawn, Cutler leveled his rifle, squeezed the trigger, and turned frustration into a corpse. The shot echoed across borders, invisible yet lethal. And in its reverberation, you can almost hear history laugh a single bullet over potatoes, rippled outward until warships flexed their iron muscles. Diplomats bristled, and men in polished boots found themselves staring down one another across furrows dug by pigs. Griffin demanded $100 in compensation, a sum as outrageous then as the idea that justice could be bought by coin when dignity was the currency at stake. Cutler, indignant, offered 10 a slap rather than a settlement, and soon local authorities were tangled in the roots of a quarrel that neither side wanted to back down from. American troops landed their uniforms crisp, their cannon wheels crunching over damp earth, while the British sailed in with warships whose black silhouettes loomed like omens on the horizon. Soldiers dug trenches, checked powder, and whispered to one another about the madness of possibly dying for a pig whose hide already lay cold in the dirt. For months, the two camps faced each other, rifles at the ready, fingers trembling against triggers, and yet beneath the tension was a strange camaraderie, men waving across no man's land, trading jokes, sometimes even sharing tobacco as though they knew they were extras in a farce written by fate itself. Newspapers fanned the absurdity cartoons of pigs wearing crowns, caricatures of generals with snouts, while behind the humor simmered dread, for one nervous shot could have set the Pacific alight with Anglo-American blood, and history would record it not as a jest, but as a tragedy born of stubbornness. Cooler heads finally prevailed. Orders came to stand down to sheath bayonets, and let the pig remain the only casualty of a war that never quite began. And yet the bitterness lingered in paperwork arbitration, dragging on for 12 long years, like a shadow that refused to lift from the island's soil. In the end, America claimed the land Britain sailed away, and the pig was remembered not as livestock, but as the spark of almost war immortalized in pamphlets and campfire tales, a creature that had no idea it nearly set empires ablaze while chewing on a farmer's potatoes. And if that makes you shake your head, remember, absurdity has feathers too. And in Australia's wide wheat fields, an entire army would one day march against birds, giant unyielding emus, and suffer humiliation so complete that the world still chuckles at their defeat. Australia, 1932. The Great Depression presses on farmers like a stone on the chest. Wheat fields stretch across western plains, and into this fragile hope storms a tide of intruders, not men, not locusts, but towering emus, 6 feet tall with feathers like armor and legs built for sprinting. They came in flocks of thousands, dark silhouettes against the horizon, descending on crops like a moving storm, tearing stalks, leaving shredded leaves in their wake. To the farmers, it was a siege to the birds. It was simply a feast offered freely by human folly. Desperate voices carried to the government, and the solution was military send Major G.P.W. Meredith with soldiers 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Surely, bullets would do what fences and pleas could not. The first encounter should have been a slaughter, but as the barrels rattled, the emus split into smaller groups scattering across the scrub. Feathers blurred into zigzags. Dust clouds shielded their retreat, and the guns barked mostly at empty air. Meredith wrote later, almost admiring that the birds fought with guerrilla tactics. Squads of emus would sprint, pause, then vanish into bushland, leaving soldiers gasping in frustration, their boots sinking into red dust, their ammunition boxes lighter with every wasted burst. Days stretched into weeks, and the casualty list mocked the effort, fewer than 1,000 birds down, while 20,000 strutted on, still feasting. The fields bore scars not of victory, but of embarrassment. Farmers staring at soldiers who had promised salvation and delivered only noise. Reporters seized the comedy headlines, ridiculed the army foreign papers, painted cartoons of generals saluting emus, and in pubs across the world, men laughed into their mugs at Australia's humiliation. Though, for the farmers watching their livelihood vanish, there was nothing funny at all. By December, the military withdrew in disgrace, leaving the farmers with their rifles, their fences, their poison baits. The emus kept coming unstoppable, as though mocking human arrogance that believed machine guns could bend nature's will. In time, the legend hardened the Great Emu War, the campaign where birds outmaneuvered soldiers, where national pride was punctured by wings and talons, where history whispered that sometimes nature refuses to kneel no matter how many bullets we waste. And if you think that sounds absurd, wait until you meet a captain who preserved his own severed ear in a jar for 7 years, an ear that would become the spark for another war, one that dragged across oceans and continents, proving once more that human pride is a weapon deadlier than steel. In 1731, far from the wheat fields of Australia, a British merchant named Robert Jenkins sailed the Caribbean's restless waters, his ship creaking under the tropical sun. When Spanish coast guards boarded, suspicion brewed, and in the clash of orders and accusations came a punishment both savage and symbolic. Jenkins was tied to the mast, helpless, as Captain Juan de Leon Fandino drew his cutlass. With one brutal swipe, the blade severed Jenkins' ear, leaving blood dripping onto the planks. And then, in a gesture as cruel as it was theatrical, the Spaniard handed the bloody ear back to him, sneering that he should show it to his king. Most men would have buried the ear or drowned it in rum-soaked memory, but Jenkins preserved it pickled in a jar, a grotesque keepsake carried from port to port, a reminder of humiliation that festered into obsession, his own body part becoming a relic of revenge. For 7 years, he kept it glass-fogged with time flesh shrinking but refusing to vanish. Every time Jenkins lifted the jar, he saw not just a wound, but a weapon waiting for the moment when anger could be transmuted into war. That moment came in 1738, when tensions between Britain and Spain over trade already strained like an old rope. Jenkins walked into the House of Commons, lifted the jar, and revealed his grisly souvenir to the stunned chamber, the smell of brine and decay mingling with outrage. The spectacle was irresistible. Here was proof of Spanish cruelty, tangible and revolting. Members of Parliament roared, fists slammed on benches, voices thundered, and within days Britain had found its casus belli, not treaties or territories, but the shriveled ear of one determined captain. Thus began the War of Jenkins' Ear. 9 years of conflict that sprawled across the Caribbean, Georgia, even as far as the Philippines. Battles erupted, forts burned, sailors drowned beneath blackened skies, all because one man refused to discard a fragment of himself. Irony shadows the tale. Thousands died in jungles and seas. Yet Jenkins himself lived on, remembered not for heroism, but for his persistence in carrying grief like a torch. His ear in a jar, a grotesque banner waved across empires. And when the war bled into the larger conflict of the Austrian succession, the ear was forgotten as quickly as it had been exalted. But the lesson lingered that a personal wound brandished at the right moment can drag nations into carnage. Yet, even that madness pales beside what came next, a general who marched for love, sending crates of oranges to his queen, while his soldiers laid waste to Portugal, proving once more that power and vanity can entwine until lives are spent like loose change for romance. The year was 1801, and Europe trembled under the shadow of Napoleon Bonaparte, a man whose hunger for dominance stretched across maps like ink bleeding through parchment. His plan was simple: in cruelty strangle Britain by cutting off its trade and force every nation into his continental blockade. Most countries bent beneath his will, but Portugal stood defiant. Bound by centuries of alliance with Britain, they refused to sever ties, knowing that to betray their partner would mean economic suicide, and so they braced themselves for the inevitable storm Napoleon would unleash. The storm came not directly from France, but from their uneasy neighbor Spain, whose armies were ordered to march into Portugal as enforcers of the emperor's will, their banners snapping above fields that would soon bear the weight of conquest. At the head of this invasion was Manuel de Godoy, Spain's powerful commander. and the notorious favorite of Queen Maria Louisa. His reputation was not forged only in politics, but in scandal, for his devotion to the Queen was whispered about in salons with tones of both envy and disgust. As villages burned and families fled, Godoy's thoughts turned not to strategy or supply lines, but to gestures of romance. From the orchards of conquered Portuguese land he plucked oranges golden and fragrant, and sent them northward as gifts for his royal mistress. Imagine the grotesque theater peasants starving in smoke-choked valleys, while couriers galloped toward Madrid bearing crates of fruit, each orange a symbol of conquest wrapped in peel and sweetness, a love letter penned in suffering. The invasion itself was swift. Portugal's resistance, fragile towns surrendering almost without fight, and in just 2 weeks the government capitulated, forced into Napoleon's blockade. Yet the name history remembered was not a treaty, but the War of the Oranges, branded forever by Godoy's grotesque courtship. For those who lost their homes, the fruit was bitter indeed. Citrus groves turned into emblems of humiliation. Their fragrance mingled with the stench of ash and fear, while in Spain the Queen admired her gifts, blind to the ruin that delivered them. In time, Portugal would wriggle free, Britain's trade would resume, and Napoleon's blockade would falter. But the absurdity remained: an entire war reduced in memory to a bowl of oranges, love, and conquest, knotted together like vines strangling their host. And when you step back from these tales, the bucket, the pig, the birds, the ear, the oranges, you see a single truth threading them all: that pride, vanity, and desire can summon armies as easily as faith or gold, and that the line between farce and tragedy is drawn in blood. Think again of Bologna's bucket, Modena's sneer, and the thousands who fell for wood and iron hoops. It is easy to laugh at the absurdity, yet beneath every chuckle lies the whisper of a widow who never laughed again. Consider the pig sprawled in a potato field, its lifeless body the spark for cannons to be rolled into place and navies to circle each other like wolves. The humor fades when you realize one wrong trigger would have drenched that island in fire. Picture the emus racing across Western Australia, bullets chasing shadows, and soldiers returning home not with laurels but with jeers. Farmers still ruined, soldiers still ashamed, birds still unbothered. Humiliation can echo louder than gunfire. Envision Jenkins lifting his jar before Parliament, the pickled ear glistening under candlelight, MPs roaring as though flesh in brine was holier than scripture. Pride turned grief into policy, and policy into graves across oceans. And imagine Godoy smiling as oranges rolled into Madrid, their skins shining under palace chandeliers, while Portuguese peasants crouched in ruined homes, wondering how fruit could weigh more than their lives. Romance, too, can be a weapon sharpened by power. These wars are threads of the same tapestry, symbols inflated until they became idols, insults festered until they became justifications, objects so ordinary, bucket, pig, bird, ear fruit, transfigured into triggers of slaughter. What does that reveal about us? That civilization is fragile, a thin varnish laid over instincts of pride, vengeance, and vanity, ready to crack whenever someone dares to mock or refuses to yield. The lesson is not simply that people once fought for foolish reasons. It is that we still do, trading lives for flags, egos, and shadows, dressing madness in the robes of necessity until the corpses pile high enough to expose the lie. Walk today through Modena, and you can still see the bucket suspended in its tower like a relic. Tourists crane their necks and laugh, but if you listen closely, perhaps you can still hear the faint clash of steel, the cries of men who did not know they were dying for a joke. And as you step back from this gallery of absurd wars, ask yourself, what are we willing to kill for now in our own age? What symbols will future generations point at and shake their heads in disbelief, whispering, "They died for that"? The bucket, the pig, the birds, the ear, the oranges, each one. An object so mundane it should never have mattered yet. Behind each stood the machinery of human ego, grinding ordinary disputes into monuments of death. Strip away the armor, the cannons, the banners, and what remains is a fragile creature called pride, gnawing at reason until men prefer blood to compromise, until wood, flesh, or fruit are raised higher than the lives of their neighbors. When chroniclers recorded these events, they did not only write history, they preserved absurdity itself, ensuring that centuries later we would laugh uneasily while realizing that the same sparks still surround us, waiting for a careless hand. For what was the War of the Bucket but a mirror of our own neighborhoods where grudges stretch years and insults are remembered longer than kindness? What was the Pig War but a warning that stubbornness unchecked can summon fleets over a carcass in the soil? The Emu War whispers a cruel lesson that technology and arrogance cannot always bend nature, and that sometimes ridicule can wound a nation deeper than bullets. The birds won not only fields, but the eternal mockery of history. The preserved ear shows how personal humiliation carried long enough can metastasize into national fury, dragging thousands into graves so that one man's grievance might echo across oceans. We still weaponize wounds today, only the jars are digital. And the oranges remind us that vanity can perfume cruelty, that love letters written in citrus can conceal the screams of villages, that conquest may wear the mask of romance while hiding the rot of ambition beneath. Together, these stories form a grotesque gallery of how easily reason is eclipsed by emotion, how thin the line is between governance and theater, how fragile the skin of civilization when pricked by insult. Perhaps the most chilling truth is that none of these wars truly ended. Their spirit lingers whenever leaders posture, whenever nations parade symbols higher than lives, whenever we choose pride over peace and mockery over mercy. So ask yourself now, when the next absurdity rises, when pride rattles its armor, and banners wave for causes, no greater than buckets and oranges will we recognize the madness, or will we march again into fields where laughter dies in blood?